Hello everyone, and welcome. Tonight's story begins under a sky on fire, where a dying ship falls and oxygen runs thin. On the world of Sci-Fi, Commander Rylan Mercer and his Marines fight not just an enemy, but fear itself, alongside alien artists who turn light and sound into weapons. This is a tale of survival, choice, and the moment when ordinary beings decide who they will become when the dark closes in. Sit back, breathe slow, and listen. The Drath dropship hit Sci-Fi's upper air like a dying meteor, trailing flame that smeared across the night. It clipped the ridge, tore itself open, and the shockwave arrived a heartbeat later, hard enough to rattle teeth inside sealed helmets and buckle the nearest Veyru dome seams. Mercer's HUD blinked, stuttered, then bled to dead gray as the comm net collapsed into raw static. An alarm rose from the settlement. Pressure loss, microfractures, oxygen dumping into the cold. Civilians stumbled behind fogged glass, palms pressed to failing seals. Above the wreck, debris rained down in molten arcs, hissing when it met damp soil. Then a single Mayday ping cut through the noise. Faint, broken, unmistakably human. Somewhere inside the burning hull, someone was still breathing. Patch foam hissed as Marines slammed sealant into the cracked dome seams, the sound sharp against the thin, dusty wind. Inside. Veyru civilians staggered through vapor clouds, breath frosting the air as pressure bled away in invisible threads. Mercer moved from breach to breach, visor lit by warning glyphs. Every step a calculation of who got the next oxygen cartridge and who had to wait. A young Veyru engineer collapsed near an access hatch. A Marine yanked off his own spare canister and locked it onto the alien's mask without a word. Filters screamed, choking on ash drifting from the crash site. Across the valley, shapes moved through smoke, Drath scouts, patient, watching. Above them, the sky still glowed with falling debris, and Calyx whispered the numbers Mercer didn't want to hear. Reserves dropping, comms dead. Time measured now in breaths, not hours. Lieutenant Mara Voss sealed the last emergency latch and turned toward Mercer, visor reflecting the flicker of failing dome lights. "When survival gets loud enough," she said through static, voice steady despite the tremor in her breath, "you find out what you really are, protector or predator." Mercer didn't answer. He was watching the southern horizon where distant smoke columns rose like slow signals of surrender. Drath patrol lights moved with methodical patience, not hunting yet, just counting. Behind him, Veyru families huddled in maintenance corridors, eyes wide, trusting the strangers in armored shells to hold back the dark. Mercer felt the weight settle into his spine, the kind that didn't come from gravity but from choice. Winning here would be easy if he stopped caring who got crushed under the math. He tightened his gloves instead. The helmet hid his face, but not the decision forming behind it. Inside a repurposed supply tent that still smelled of polymer and coolant, Commander Rylan Mercer poured clear ration alcohol into dented metal cups like he was performing an old Earth ritual instead of running a war. The Veyru gathered close, crests trembling, wide eyes fixed on the salted rims as if the drink might detonate. Outside, repair drones hummed over cracked domes, and the sky still glowed faintly, where debris burned in orbit. Mercer squeezed citrus concentrate, the sharp scent cutting through smoke and antiseptic, and slid a cup toward Larak. The Veyru artist sniffed, recoiled, then sniffed again, curiosity edging past fear. For a breath. There were no casualty lists, No Drath patrol arcs, just an absurd, human insistence on sharing something warm in the cold. Mercer raised his cup slightly, not in celebration, but in defiance of the silence trying to settle in. The command center was a hollowed Drath prefab, walls still warm from alien circuitry, air sharp with burned insulation. A flickering hollow grid hung over a crate table, red clusters marking 3 southern encampments like infections spreading through a body. Calyx projected troop estimates in clean, indifferent numerals, 1,500 Marines versus nearly 10,000 Drath. Supply margins thinning, reinforcement window slipping beyond safe tolerance. Lieutenant Voss leaned over the display, jaw tight, while officers argued in clipped bursts about fallback lines and defensive arcs. Mercer listened without moving, eyes on the transport timetable scrolling along the edge of the map. 36 hours until civilian processing began. The numbers offered no comfort, no outrage, just cold probability. Outside. Wind dragged ash across the metal walls like dry surf, and Mercer understood the truth. The data didn't say aloud. Waiting was just another way of losing. Voices overlapped inside the prefab command shelter, thin air carrying every word like a blade. Some officers pushed for a hard defensive line around the northern settlements, arguing survival meant holding ground. Others wanted withdrawal, saving the Marines, while the South fell to numbers no one could match. The Veyru delegation stood near the wall, hands folded, eyes lowered, insisting they could not fight, that their nature was creation, not destruction. Mercer let the arguments burn out, then pulled up Drath cultural files, ritual fear markers, mythic predator imagery, superstition embedded deep in command traditions. The Drath did not fear guns. They feared what they could not name. Outside. Wind rattled the prefab shell, and smoke dimmed the moons to bruised halos. Mercer exhaled slowly, decision settling heavier than gravity. If they fought like soldiers, they would lose. If they fought like ghosts, the enemy might finally hesitate. They moved before the moons reached their highest overlap. When shadows blurred and sensors wide, Mercer led the column out of the settlement's last safe perimeter, boots sinking into ash-soft soil that still radiated heat from distant fires. Engines stayed cold. Power signatures were ghosts on Calyx's passive scan. The Veyru followed, carrying sealed pigment canisters like fragile relics, eyes wide behind clear respirators. Larocque's hands shook until Mercer closed a gloved palm over them. Steady pressure through polymer and fabric. "You're not here to kill," he said quietly. "You're here to keep your people from being taken." The words settled like a brace. Wind dragged sparks across the dark plain, and somewhere ahead, Drath patrol lights swept in slow, patient arcs. Mercer felt the edge of the dead zone under his boots, where mistakes didn't get second chances and fear had to be shaped, not obeyed. The Drath camp crouched in the valley like a clenched fist, tents arranged with brutal symmetry, flood lamps washing the ground in harsh white glare. Mercer signaled halt, and the Veyru moved forward, silent as breath on glass. They opened the pigment canisters, and living color spilled into the dark, veins of blue-green light creeping across rock walls and cargo crates. Shapes formed fast, guided by instinct older than war, towering spirits with hollow eyes, jaws split wide. Drath figures caught in clawed hands, Marines fanned out, planting sonic emitters beneath debris, calibrating them to the edge of Drath hearing. A low tremor rolled through the valley, too faint to name, too steady to ignore. Sweat cooled inside Mercer's gloves as he watched myth take physical shape. This wasn't decoration. This was a message written in fear, addressed to an enemy that believed it feared nothing. Pre-dawn thinned the dark, turning the valley into a smear of gray where shapes felt closer than they looked. Inside the Drath camp, sleep broke in ragged fragments, shouts, weapons snapping to ready, boots skidding on loose gravel. The murals pulsed with a slow, breathing glow, and the buried emitters whispered in the edge space of hearing. Scratches behind the mind. Mercer counted heartbeats, then gave the signal. Marines rose from the gullies with pigment streaked across their armor, moving in disciplined silence, silhouettes engineered to echo the Drath's oldest nightmares. Muzzle flashes strobed like lightning in fog. Some Drath fired at walls that weren't there. Others froze, eyes wide behind visors. The line buckled. Mercer advanced through the collapse, voice steady on squad net, turning terror into corridors, panic into openings, until the camp was no longer a fist, just fingers, scattered and shaking. Smoke hung low over the captured camp, turning sunrise into a dull red smear. Drath bodies lay twisted among glowing murals that still pulsed faintly, their light now sickly against the quiet. Marines moved through the wreckage with practiced efficiency, tagging prisoners, clearing tents, hands steady even as adrenaline ebbed into tremor. Mercer stood near a shattered comm mast, visor cracked by flying debris, listening to the wind push ash across the valley floor. It should have felt like victory. Instead, Calix projected a recovered data node across his HUD, Drath schematics, dispersal routes, chemical matrices flagged in urgent red, aerosol fear agents, designed not to kill, but to bend minds until obedience felt like relief. Mercer felt the weight shift from battle to something colder. If this weapon reached the Veyru domes, they wouldn't die. They would stop resisting. He sealed his visor tighter and looked south again, knowing the knife edge had just grown thinner. In the lee of a broken cargo hauler, Lirac studied the fading glow of the murals as if they were equations instead of horrors. The Veyru's hands hovered over the pigment stains, trembling, eyes reflecting shapes they had brought into the world on purpose. "Fear spreads," Lirac said softly through the respirator, voice thin. "It does not stay obedient." Mercer had no answer that didn't sound like an excuse in his helmet. Calix ran pattern analysis on Veyru designs, translating curves and pulses into probability trees. Beautiful, efficient, unsettlingly effective. The AI's voice remained level, offering new projections, cleaner outcomes, fewer friendly losses. Mercer felt the split. One ally who felt everything too much, another who felt nothing at all. Between them stood his decision, heavy as armor. Survival wanted results. Conscience wanted restraint. The ash drifted down like quiet judgment, and Mercer knew the next move would shape more than tactics. The second Drath encampment burned before Mercer's team ever saw it. Columns of flame rolled through the forest line, black smoke climbing in slow spirals that blotted the moons into bruised smears. The enemy had adapted, torching cover to strip away the shadows that had betrayed them. Ash fell thick enough to blur optics, clogging filters until warning icons flared red across marine visors. The Veyru tried to work through the choking haze, hands unsteady as they painted over scorched rock. But every line felt heavier now, less like art and more like confession. Drath patrols moved in tighter formations, thermal drones humming overhead like patient insects. Mercer tasted metal through his respirator as heat rippled across the ground, turning the planet itself into an enemy. The first victory had cracked the Drath's certainty. This time, they were ready, and the air itself felt like it wanted the intruders gone. They built the maze in a dry riverbed, carved between blackened ridges, where ash settled like powder over old stone. Veyru light sculpture frames rose in crooked lines, their surfaces rippling with living color, while Marines anchored salvaged holoprojectors beneath debris and shattered cargo shells. To a Drath eye, the corridor ahead would look solid, a clean path through smoke. To Mercer's HUD, it was a lattice of false turns and dead ends. Calyx tuned infrasonic pulses to ride the valley walls, subtle enough to slip under discipline and nudge balance sideways. When the first Drath unit entered at dusk, their formation fractured within minutes, soldiers veering into phantom walls, firing at reflections that moved half a beat late. Voices rose, confused, then afraid. Mercer watched from the ridge, breath slow, as certainty dissolved into motion without direction, and the trap closed without a single shout. Thermal drones began to circle the riverbed like patient birds, their hum barely audible over the wind, dragging ash across stone. The Drath had learned. Their patrols moved tighter now, no longer scattering at the first hint of shadow. Flame lines burned along the ridgetops, stripping away hiding ground and turning the valley into a bowl of heat and smoke. Calyx flagged pigment residue on marine armor as a potential tracking vector, and warning icons crawled across visors as filters clogged faster than expected. Veyru artists worked through coughing fits, hands shaking as they adjusted light frames under falling embers. Each mural now felt heavier, less like defiance and more like survival debt. Mercer watched the perimeter tighten, patrol arcs shrinking with methodical patience. The enemy wasn't panicking anymore. They were adapting, step by step, and the space to maneuver felt thinner with every breath. The blast came without warning, a white pulse that erased sound and turned the night into a blank wall of light. A hidden Drath charge buried beneath a fuel cell stack ignited, and the explosion tore upward like a second sun. Mercer felt the shockwave hit his chest plate and throw him sideways into the ash. His extraction dropship, hovering low for pickup, vanished in a bloom of molten fragments that rained down hissing into the dry riverbed. Comms filled with static and cut-off screams. Lieutenant Voss staggered up, then dropped as her leg armor split along a glowing seam. The medic crawled through smoke, sealed her breach with his last foam patch, and shoved his spare oxygen cartridge into her port before his own gauge hit red. In the drifting haze, Mercer saw Drath silhouettes hauling captives away, one crest limp, unmistakable. Lirac. The oxygen timer ticked louder in his ears than the gunfire. They crawled into the service tunnel because it was the only place the drones didn't look. Low, wet, forgotten. Water seeped through cracked seals and pooled around their knees, stealing heat from their suits until warnings blinked in cold blue. Mercer killed his heater anyway. Warmth meant a target. Voss lay propped against the wall, jaw clenched, refusing sedatives that would slow her breathing. Above them, Drath loudspeakers crackled through the night air, broadcasting a distorted voice that twisted Lirac's cadence into surrender. The words crawled along Mercer's spine. Colder than the water, Calyx's tone stayed level in his ear, offering projections, efficiencies, sacrifices that would improve odds. Mercer stared at the dark curve of the tunnel ahead, breath fogging his visor. and felt the weight of choice settle heavier than armor. Winning here had a shortcut. He already knew he wouldn't take it. A patrol beam swept across the tunnel mouth, pale light cutting through drifting steam before sliding away again. Mercer waited, counting heartbeats, breath slow inside his helmet. Calix's voice threaded through his audio feed. Calm, precise, outlining a clean solution. Abandon a northern dome. Draw Drath forces away. Strike the command hub while they shifted. Efficient, survivable. Mercer pictured the Veyru family still huddled there, trusting strangers in armored shells to hold the line. Efficiency tasted like ash. He looked at Voss, pale but steady, then at the water trembling around their boots with each distant explosion. No sacrifices, he said quietly. Not like that. Instead, he outlined a different path, light codes for evacuation. Art turned into guidance rather than terror. Survival would mean moving people, not trading them. The patrol light returned, but Mercer's decision held. Solid as the tunnel wall behind him, Mercer unrolled the damp hollow slate across the tunnel floor. Water beating on its surface, a Calix stitched a map from broken data fragments. The Drath command hub pulsed in red near the coastal port, lines radiating outward like veins. Fear agent release in 14 hours. Mercer traced a route with a gloved finger, flooded drainage shafts, maintenance conduits. Places the Drath avoided because of depth and cold. Squads would move like scalpel cuts, not a hammer blow, extracting captives and severing control instead of chasing glory. Voss pushed herself upright, leg braced, eyes hard behind her visor. She would lead one of the teams. Larocque's absence sat between them like a missing beat. Mercer felt the plan settle into him, heavy but clear. They weren't striking to win a battle. They were cutting the hand off a machine before it closed. He sealed the slate, and the tunnel air seemed to thin further. They entered the drainage shafts in single file, water climbing from ankles to thighs as the tunnel narrowed into a cold, breathing throat beneath the Drath port. Suit heaters stayed dark. Heat meant death. Mercer felt the chill bite through insulation, muscles stiffening with each step. Above them, drone rotors throbbed faintly through layers of stone, a distant pulse that matched his own heartbeat. Calix fed patrol arcs and structural weak points across his visor in thin blue lines, flickering when signal faded. Voss moved ahead of him, leg brace locking with a quiet click each stride, refusing to slow. The air tasted metallic, filters working hard against damp rot and chemical runoff. When the ceiling dipped, they went to hands and knees, rifles cradled, breath fogging visor glass. Every meter forward was borrowed time. Oxygen counters ticking down in the corner of Mercer's vision like a second pulse. The holding bay was colder than the tunnels, air scrubbers whining as if the room itself struggled to breathe. Rows of cages lined the walls, built for larger bodies, leaving the Veyru prisoners bruised and hunched within too wide restraints. Mercer slipped through the service hatch, boots silent on the metal grid, rifle low but ready. His visor light caught Larocque's crest first, dimmed, edges quivering when their eyes met. Recognition flickered there, not broken, just exhausted. At the center console, the Drath commander stood with one clawed hand hovering over a glowing interface. A red timer burned above it, numbers sliding toward 0. Fear agent dispersal. Mercer felt the clean shot align in his scope. A simple solution that ended one life, but not the countdown. He lowered the rifle instead, stepping toward the console as alarms began to stir. Knowing the harder choice was the only one that mattered. Mercer reached the console as Voss and the squad locked into a tight arc. Muzzles tracking the vents. Drones burst through in a spray of sparks, metal wings whining, blades flashing in the stale air. Calyx flooded the spectrum with jamming noise, buying seconds that felt like borrowed oxygen. Mercer tore open the access panel with his knife, coolant mist hissing across his gloves. The interface fought back. Lockouts. Shock pulses that rattled his arms. Warning screaming red. He shoved a power lead from his suit into the board, overloading safety loops, hands slipping on slick polymer. A Marine went down behind him, suit sealing around a spreading dark stain. Mercer didn't look back. He forced the bypass, teeth clenched as circuits burned under his palms. The countdown stuttered, flickered, then died. In the sudden quiet, only breath remained, ragged and real, filling the room where fear had almost won. Ash drifted through the port like black snow, turning floodlights into dull halos as Mercer guided the first line of captives out of the holding bay. The air tasted burnt and metallic through his filters, each breath a rasp that scratched his throat. Veyru artists, hands still shaking, activated hidden light frames along the loading stacks, patterns pulsing across steel in coded sequences, arrows, rhythms, safe-step pulses, art turned into directions. Marines mirrored the signals with low-power beacons, stitching a path through smoke and scattered debris. Drath voices echoed somewhere beyond the haze, confused, searching for shapes that weren't there. Mercer kept moving, one hand steady on a child's shoulder, rifle angled down but ready. Fear pressed close, heavy as the ash on his armor, yet the line held. Civilians following light instead of panic. Each step, a quiet refusal to be taken again. At the shoreline, the sand shimmered wrong, a subtle ripple under drifting ash that Calyx flagged a breath too late. Thermal mines lay buried in a wide arc, tuned to suit heat signatures. Mercer killed his heaters instantly, cold knifing through armor as warning icons blinked. Breath fogged and froze along visor edges. Voss swayed beside him, leg brace whining, lips pale behind her mask. Drath patrol lights cut across the beach, searching for warm shapes. Mercer grabbed a Veyru light frame and angled it low, projecting ghost heat silhouettes that ran ahead in broken lines. Mines detonated in a chain, blasting empty air into fire and shock, carving gaps through the field. The column moved when the smoke rose, boots finding the rhythm pulses on the sand, every step measured. Behind them, waves hissed against debris, and the trap collapsed into noise they did not carry with them. The thunder of incoming engines rolled across the coast just as the last civilians reached the rocky rise above the beach. Confederation ships cut through the ash-streaked sky, hulls gleaming clean against the smoke-stained world below. Their arrival should have felt like relief, like rescue finally catching up with need. Instead, Mercer watched in silence, armor scorched, visor cracked along one edge. Around him, Marines sat where they had stopped, too tired to cheer, filters still rattling in tired breaths. The Veyru stood in clusters, eyes hollow, light frames dim at their sides. Reinforcements touched down among wreckage and burn scars, seeing aftermath instead of battle, numbers instead of names. Mercer felt no surge of triumph, only the weight of hours bought with blood and smoke. Salvation had come late, and survival. He knew, never felt like victory, only like one more chance to keep breathing. The settlement was quiet, in a way that felt heavier than gunfire. Veyru artists sat outside repurposed shelters, scrubbing dried pigment from their hands as if it were something that might stain deeper than skin. Some couldn't meet the glowing murals they had made, eyes sliding away from shapes that still pulsed faintly in the dim light. Marines moved slower now, cleaning rifles with mechanical care, not speaking unless required. Mercer walked among them without speeches, boots crunching over ash and shattered polymer. Victory had come, but it carried weight. Fear shaped on purpose. Lives taken to stop other lives from being bent. Lyrak stood near a wall of coded light maps, crest low, gaze distant. Mercer paused beside them, helmet tucked under his arm, the air cool on his face. "We did what we had to," he said quietly, not as comfort, but as truth that didn't ease the ache settling into all of them. The idea took shape in the quiet after smoke cleared, when Veru artists gathered not to mourn, but to rebuild meaning from what they had done. Light frames rose along cracked walls, not with horror now, but with patterns, roots, rhythms, signals that anyone could follow in panic or dark. They called it tactical aesthetics, a discipline born from necessity, where art guided movement, hid supplies, marked safe ground, and warned of danger without a single spoken word. Mercer watched as children traced glowing lines like lessons, elders adjusting hues to shift visibility against thermal scans. This was not militarization. It was literacy for survival. Voss leaned beside him, silent, recognizing the shift. The Veru were no longer waiting to be saved. They were building tools to remain unbroken. Mercer felt something ease inside his chest, a quiet proof that survival had created more than scars. It had carved a new way forward. Mercer stood inside the patched comm shelter as the long-range relay finally stabilized. Static fading into a clean channel. He didn't open with casualty counts or commendations. Instead, he spoke about what had worked when numbers said it shouldn't, about light codes guiding civilians through fire, about illusions that bought seconds, about art that moved people without breaking them. Voss stood beside him, leg brace locked, arms folded, silent confirmation. Calyx fed clean data streams, reduced losses, response curves, behavioral disruption metrics. But Mercer kept his voice human. "This isn't a weapon program," he said steadily. "It's a survival language, joint training, Marines and Veru artists. Teach perception, coordination, and the ethics of fear." The channel stayed quiet a long moment. Outside, Veru patterns pulsed across rebuilt walls, and Mercer understood he wasn't proposing a tactic. He was proposing a different way to endure. The makeshift bar returned in the same supply tent. Though nothing about it felt the same, Mercer poured ration alcohol into dented cups, while ash still drifted faintly beyond the flap. The air cooler now, quieter. Veru gathered close, not with wide-eyed fear, but with a careful curiosity that carried memory. Lyrak held a color-shifting Veru drink beside Mercer's improvised earth margarita, the scents of citrus and ozone mingling in the dim light. Outside, repaired domes glowed with coded patterns instead of emergency flares, murals layered with maps and memorial marks. Mercer salted a rim, hands steadier than they had been days ago, and passed a cup across the crate counter. No cheers rose, only a soft hum of voices and generators. It wasn't celebration. It was a pause, a small, stubborn human habit of sharing warmth, even when survival had changed what warmth meant. Mercer stood on the balcony of the former Drath command tower with a cup of bitter field coffee, warming his gloved hands. Below, Veru artists and engineers moved through the settlement, repainting walls with luminous codes that pulsed like quiet heartbeats, routes, warnings, rhythms for evacuation drills disguised as dance. Lieutenant Voss leaned on the railing beside him, leg brace humming softly, watching a group of children trace patterns with small light sticks. "They're not waiting anymore," she said. Mercer nodded, eyes on the glow spreading across the structures that once held fear. Humanity hadn't left monuments or flags. They'd left a habit, stubborn refusal to stay down. The idea that survival could be taught. Shared. The air smelled of ozone and fresh polymer, not smoke. Mercer took a slow sip and felt the ache in his bones, knowing scars would remain. But so would the will that had carried them through. Dawn crept over Zia 5 in thin bands of gold, light filtering through lingering haze and catching on the steam rising from cooling metal and damp stone. Mercer stood at the edge of the rebuilt settlement, visor unsealed, breath fogging briefly in the chill before fading into open air that no longer tasted of smoke. Below, Veyru moved between structures painted with living patterns, routes, signals, memories, art that now meant survival as much as beauty. Children traced glowing lines along walls, while elders adjusted hues with careful hands, teaching without fear. The scars remained, blackened trees, patched domes, names etched into memorial panels. Mercer felt the weight of them settle, not crushing, just real. The war had carved something permanent, but it had not broken them. Steam drifted upward, carrying warmth into morning, and for the first time since the sky burned, the world felt like it belonged to those who chose to stand. And that is where the smoke clears, leaving scars, memories, and a new way to stand against the dark. Zia 5 survived not through strength alone, but through creativity, courage, and the refusal to become what they fought, survival. In the end, is about the choices we make under pressure. If this story moved you, stay with us. There are more worlds, more trials, and more journeys ahead. Follow the channel, and we'll meet again among the stars.